Now, it appears to be implied that the first Jon chapter takes place the same day as the first Ned chapter here, as there is a feast currently underway to celebrate the arrival of King Robert to Winterfell, and it appears to now be 4 hours into that feast. We get introduced to Jon here, who is 14 years old, and he also notes the others in his and the king's party and certain people's ages and appearances. We see Queen Cersei has gold hair and green eyes and often wears emeralds. Daughter Myrcella is not quite 8 years old yet. Joffrey is 12 years old and is already taller than both Jon and Robb and has gold curls and green eyes too. Tyrion, the Queen's brother, has white blonde hair and also has 1 green eye and 1 black. And we find that his sister Arya, who's the only one of Ned's children who actually resembles Jon, is only 9 years old. We also get introduced to Ned's only other living sibling, Benjen, who smiles at Jon while he is at the feast. He also says to Jon that he was younger than what Jon was when he first got drunk properly, and notably he has blue-grey eyes, and he is dressed fancy for dinner, which is interesting as people always take this to assume that Benjen is very much pompous in his role at the wall. However, it must be remembered that this is a feast for the arrival of the king, and Benjen is there as a guest honorarily, and so the fancy get-up is probably because the king is in town. It doesn't necessarily imply that he always dresses this way. Now, curiously enough, it is Benjen who suggests to Jon that he should join the Watch, and Jon eagerly jumps upon that based on childhood stories of the Watch and its importance. This is curious though, as Benjen immediately changes his tone, as when Jon notes that bastards grow faster than normal men, Benjen has a notable downward twist to his mouth, and also notes Daeron Targaryen, who conquered Dorne at just the age of 14, but then died at the age of 18, losing 60,000 men in the process trying to keep Dorne. He also then notes to Jon that until you know the love of a woman, you can't give it up to join the Night's Watch, which angers Jon. Which makes me wonder, what are the circumstances surrounding Benjen going to the Wall? We also see the motifs of Cersei being associated with the others, or ice, continues in this chapter, as due to Robert and Ned having their visit to the crypts, Cersei is stated to be as cold as an ice sculpture. Now, Benjen calling Jon son also severely triggers him, as being a bastard, that's a bit of a sore subject to him, and he eventually makes a fool of himself being so drunk and leaves the hall. Well outside, he encounters Tyrion Lannister, and interestingly enough, we get some rather subtle implications in the wordings here that George uses. Tyrion is referred to as a gargoyle. Now, Tyrion is a Lannister, who are represented by lions, and the only major representation of lions that we know of in this world is the Lion of the Night. So as we go further into the chapters, especially when we get to the Bran's chapters, I find it interesting that gargoyles are actually associated a lot with lions. If you take the whole Lion of the Night, Children of the Forest connection, it does seem kind of interesting. The gargoyles represent the Children of the Forest in some way, particularly in dreams in the future. Now, it is curious here as we find that Ghost actually snarls at Tyrion for some reason, and as I believe that the direwolves have been sent to monitor the Starks by the Children of the Forest here, it does seem interesting that Ghost is repulsed by Tyrion in this manner. Tyrion also goes on to note that Jon has more North inside him than what his brothers do, which is actually really funny when you look at the genetics of the Stark siblings. Jon and Arya are the only ones who actually resemble Ned Stark in appearance. The rest take their genetics primarily from Catelyn, which is odd considering that the genetics involved there are what would be considered recessive and rare genetic traits, which brings back the whole logic of what happened with the Stark-Tully marriage, as there's the whole theory of sovereign ambitions which exists, as we can infer that based on certain hints given by Catelyn, she brought Maester Luwin with her to the north when she married Ned, and she also brought the Faith of the Seven with her. So the Faith are gradually influencing their way into the north, which, as far as we are aware, has spent several thousand years still pertaining to the old god religion that was wiped out in the south when the Faith came to be the dominant power. So it does seem interesting that certain factors have contrived this marriage to take place, as Catelyn and all her children hold the new gods and not the old gods of the forest. So by marrying into the dominant house in the north, it would only be a case of a few generations until the Faith has officially taken over the north as the dominant religion. Which makes me wonder, given the logistics behind the War of the Dawn Age and the motives of the others, could this be in some way part of the reason why they are now attacking? Because, as you see from my theory videos, I strongly believe the histories are heavily doctored, and the original war was between the Children of the Forest and the Old Gods religion and that of the Faith, as George has heavily taken inspiration here from the Christian conquistadors from the 1500s when they first took over Latin America. As we've seen from history, the Aztecs very much resemble the Children of the Forest, what with the blood sacrifices and the obsidian weaponry. And then the Faith very much resembles Abrahamic religions like Christianity, and so when they came and invaded, it makes sense that they were completely able to outmatch the religions of the local area. And then, as we saw from those time periods, what then happened whenever Christianity took over a new land was they either absorbed the lore and gods of the old religion into theirs in order to assimilate the cultures, or they completely wiped them out. Which makes sense when you now look at the histories and my theories. The histories are being written by the Maesters, who basically sit hand in hand with the Septons in terms of ruling Westeros, and so they decide what the true history is. So it does make sense that there is definitely a sovereign ambitions or Grand Maester conspiracy going on with the Faith and the Andals. Because the one thing we have always learned from history is, in war, it is the victors who write the history.